Plagued by the uncertainties of our modern world, life can seem awfully bleak at times. In our search for purpose, meaning, and certainty, most of us would love to have an inkling of what lies ahead, to have even a glimpse of tomorrow today. In our podcast, Knowing Tomorrow Today, we share from the Bible a wonderful blueprint of hope, which reveals that God wants us to live an abundant life and that He has an amazing future planned for us. All right, welcome to our podcast, Knowing Tomorrow Today. I'm your host, Merrick Brown. Thank you always for joining me on this journey of hope. I always want to encourage you to like, to subscribe, and to share these messages of hope wherever you listen, with your family, with your friends, with your coworkers, and just all who you meet along life's journey. You know, friends, I grew up in the 1980s and 1990s, and looking back for a time, I did naively believe that I had come of age in a so-called post-racial world, in a period of history in which the horrors of slavery, of segregation, of discrimination, which had scarred the American landscape for decades, had somehow receded into history by the late 20th century. I believed, as did many others, I'm sure, that the civil rights movements of the 1960s, led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and others, had helped to usher in many new significant legislative and social changes in America. There had been key achievements, right, like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which had dismantled legal segregation and discrimination in America. And so in the 1980s and 1990s, saw just the rise of prominent black public figures in American life and society, such as Jesse Jackson, General Colin Powell, Oprah Winfrey, Eddie Murphy, Michael Jackson, Bill Cosby, Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, and so many others, right? And so by the late 1990s, I thought naively, or maybe the impression was communicated in the American media and culture, that the American society had improved, right, interracially in all sectors of society. Somehow, there was a belief that the virulent racism of the past was on the decline, right? And even on the verge of disappearing from American life. And more so, friends, the election of America's first black president, Barack Obama, in 2008, also seemed to signal that America had finally entered into its post-racial period and was now advancing to become a more perfect union. And boy, were we so wrong about that. We were so wrong. I'm telling you, friends, it could really be argued, right, that President Barack Obama's election actually stirred up a negative reaction in which the ugliness of racism once again raised its ugly head in American society. Birtherism appeared. Do you remember birtherism, right? Birtherism was all about the false claims about President Obama's birthplace and whether he was legitimately the president or not, right? And also in the Obama years, resentment and fear among some white Americans was aroused because somehow they saw Obama's presidency as a threat. Imagine that, to their status or identity. And of course, racially charged rhetoric has become more common in our political world, in the American society, and this has contributed to greater social and political divisions in the American society. There were also high-profile police killings, remember those, of black individuals like Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown, and these incidents sparked national protests and movements like Black Lives Matter and brought attention to an entrenched system of racism. Friends, there's also been a rise, we've seen this, a rise in white national extremist groups who have gained visibility and influence, especially online, with rhetoric opposing multiculturalism and diversity. In recent years, political leaders have labeled immigrants as rapists and criminals. Immigrants from countries like, Haiti, just from Caribbean countries in general, right? El Salvador, African countries have been demonized and dehumanized by political leaders. In fact, during the 2024 American election, Haitian immigrants there in Springfield, Ohio, were falsely labeled as cat eaters due to basic xenophobic rumors, right? These rumors were often used to dehumanize specific ethnic groups, right, by promoting negative and culturally insensitive narratives. Friends, and so the question is why? Why has racism continued to raise its ugly head in American society and in our world throughout history? Why is it that in spite of the forces that have been unleashed to push back against racism, it has always seemed to reappear? The fact is, friends, racism is deeply seated in society because it is rooted in centuries of social, economic, political structures designed to maintain power and privilege for dominant groups. And over time, these systems became ingrained in societal practices, like, in law, in institutions, perpetuating inequality and making racism difficult to dismantle. In other words, friends, racism is very much like the ancient disease of leprosy, in that both racism and leprosy can exist unnoticed for long periods with underlying harm before visible symptoms emerge, right? Friends, just like leprosy slowly destroys the body, racism corrodes the fabric of society, harming individuals and communities over generations. And we see where the victims of racism, right? These victims of racism, like leprosy sufferers, are often socially ostracized and marginalized. Friends, both racism and leprosy, despite efforts to eradicate them, persist with lingering remnants continuing to affect society. And so, my friends, at the end of the day, racism and discrimination, like sin, right, are deep-rooted issues that are rooted in the human heart. And so the only way to remove and heal society of racism is for God to heal the human heart. That is the absolute only way. Friends, racism is as ancient as the Bible itself. And in fact, the Bible does tell us, it actually tells us how God responds to racism. There's an example there in the Old Testament in the book of Numbers, specifically Numbers chapter 12, verse 1 to 10, right? Where we see there, it was Miriam and Aaron, they were criticizing Moses' wife, who was an Ethiopian woman. And this is what it says there in Numbers chapter 12, verse 1 to 10. It says, Then Miriam and Aaron spoke out against Moses because of the Ethiopian wife whom he had married, right? For he had married an Ethiopian woman. So it says, the anger of the Lord was aroused against them, that is, against Aaron and Miriam, and he departed. And when the cloud departed from above the tabernacle, suddenly Miriam became leprous, as white as snow. Then Aaron turned toward Miriam, and there she was. She was a leper. And so we see here that because Miriam, probably because she was the instigator of the whole thing, right, spoke out against Moses' black wife, she was an Ethiopian woman. When she did this, God struck her with leprosy, right? And it was only after Moses prayed to God for her that she was placed, she was placed outside of the camp for 7 days, and after this, she was able to re-enter. And so here we see how God views racism and discrimination. Friends, Jesus also strongly opposed racism, right? I showed how through his actions and his teachings that emphasize love, equality, and breaking down racial and ethnic barriers. I mean, a prime example would be in the Gospel of John, in John chapter 4, where he interacts with the Samaritan woman at the well. Now, it was a no-no for a Jew to interact with a Samaritan, right? So, because the Samaritans were despised by the Jews due to deep-rooted ethnic hostility. Yet Jesus, we see in this passage where Jesus actually engages with her, breaking down societal norms, showing that he values all peoples regardless of their race or their background. In fact, Jesus in John chapter 4 offers this woman, this Samaritan woman, living water, which is salvation, right? It represents salvation, which demonstrates that his love and message of the gospel is for everyone. All right? The gospel transcends race and cultural divisions, friends. Friends, the Bible advances reality that all humans, I mean, whether you're red or yellow, black, brown, or white, are from one blood. You're from the same blood. And we find that Paul actually says this in the book of Acts, in Acts chapter 7, verse 26. And there Paul says, listen, he said, and he, God, has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and their boundaries and their dwellings. Friends, all of humanity is related by blood, right? We are all of the same blood. We are all of one blood, right? We are of the same one human family. You know, as my fellow Jamaican Jimmy Cliff, he sang these words. He said, no matter where you were born, we are human beings. The same chemistry, with emotions and feelings all corresponding in love. And then he says, you can't get around it, no matter how hard you try. We all are one. Perhaps today, friends, perhaps you realize that you have been guilty some way of racism and discrimination in the past, whether you're black, you're white, or brown, or yellow, whatever color you are. Jesus wants to cleanse your heart of the leprosy of racism right now. Why don't you reach out to him? Right? He's waiting right now to transform your heart into a heart of love. Listen, this same Jesus is also able to cleanse your heart and my heart from the from the leprosy of sin and the leprosy of racism. Also tells us there in Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 11 to 14. He says, listen, I have plans for the human family. I have plans for you, right? Whatever your race is, I have plans for you. And he says, I know what I've planned for you. I have plans to prosper you, not to harm you. I have plans to give you a future filled with hope. He says, when you call out to me and come to me in prayer, I will hear your prayers. If you seek me with all of your heart and soul, I will make myself available to you. My friends, the Lord Jesus has planned an amazing future for us, right? He's planned an amazing future for whatever race you are. It doesn't matter. You could be black or white or yellow or brown. I mean, we're all of one. We're all of one blood in human family. And salvation, the salvation that Jesus offers is for all of humanity, right? My hope is that you will come to trust Jesus and that you will choose to live by his way, by his word, and not by your own way. And I promise you, if you do, your life will never be the same. Listen, as we part, I always want to encourage you to remember to like, to subscribe, and to share this podcast wherever you listen, whether it be on Apple or Spotify or you're on YouTube. Just go ahead and subscribe, and you'll be notified once we have a new episode out. You can also send me an email. My email address is knowingtomorrowtoday@gmail.com, and it's knowingtomorrowtoday@gmail.com. If you have additional questions, if you have prayer requests, just reach out to me. And when you do, I'm going to send you a free electronic copy of the book that actually inspired this podcast. It's called Knowing Tomorrow Today, Glimpses of the Future That Will Change Your Life. Listen, may God continue to bless you. I'm Merrick Brown. Until next time, you stay blessed and you stay well. Never stay the same. It's gonna get better.